So, is it different strokes for different institutions now? Well, who knows? Well, let's head to Abuja and start the conversation from there. Mark?
Thank you, Chamberlain. We're being joined this morning by Lieutenant Colonel Ademola Lawal, who's a retired Army officer and also the head of research at the Savannah Center for Diplomacy, Development, and I hope I'm not leaving something else, for diplomacy, development,
democracy
and democracy.
Yes,
you're welcome to Sunrise Daily this morning.
Thank you very much.
Well, you have seen the conversations that have been happening on the security situation in Nigeria. I think starting from, let's start from the, well, not the most recent one, but the one before the most recent one, at least the one that started this year, the controversy on Amotekun that started this year after the Southwest governors launched that outfit, and then subsequent conversations. Before that time, there have been conversations on community policing, and now the National Assembly is back from their recess, and they've taken up the conversation on security, and it would seem that there is some general consensus that our security architecture needs to be rejigged. Can you tell us what your thinking is on Nigeria's current security architecture and the areas you think we can actually have improvement to get the kind of results we're looking for?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks for having me. Yes, the national security architecture needs reforms. And let me begin from the foundational aspect of it. The building block for national security architecture begins from a territorial space. Call it community level. Whatever happens in terms of insecurity takes place at a small territorial space where you can call community. And so the building block and the foundation for any national security architecture must begin with the community. So in that case, we really need to address, community security. And how do you do that? I believe that community-based policing is an appropriate thing to do, but it's not being properly addressed. And Amotekun has taken the bull by the horn, but even that does not translate to the real community-based policing. Community-based policing is owned by the people, the community themselves, and resourced by them. And so it's an independent structure where the community themselves take ownership of security of their community. For example, if you go to some of these estates in urban areas, you find, the urban people in that particular estate organizing themselves to protect themselves. So that's the part of a thing we are talking about. So community-based policing is basically a preventive measure that, rally the resources of the community in order to generate early warning devices and prompt reaction that they can call on the official police to intervene.
It's very interesting that you have brought in the dimension of calling on the official policing, even though, the official police, even though you say that it is owned by the people.
Exactly.
Now the police, a lot of policemen have argued that community policing is initiated by the police themselves. They are the ones who are seeking the cooperation of the community, rather than the community saying, well, we are creating our own protective outfit, and it is when we need the police that we now call them in. It is supposed to be the other way around. Is that how you see it? No,
that's not how I see it. They got it wrong.
Who's getting it wrong?
The police is getting it wrong.
How?
The police is getting it wrong because the community themselves must first and foremost protect themselves by way of surveillance. It's just like you live in a house, for example, and you wake up in the night to hear sounds, and you begin to walk around the compound to really surveil the place and find out what's happening and all that. It's like information gathering to know.
If I hear sounds in my house, I'm going to stay inside.
Well,
and watch from inside what is going on outside.
Well, at least you blow whistle or alert people to say that, hey, something is going on here and, you know, somebody should go and investigate.
Yeah.
So that is the beginning. That's the real beginning of, you know, community policing. You have to really, you know, police your assets, your house, your property, first and foremost by you. And that's normal law of nature for you to begin. So that's exactly what it is. Community policing is about, first and foremost, the community owning it. And that's when, if you read the national security strategy of this present administration, it talks about whole of society approach. And when you say whole of society approach, it does not mean the resources of government. It simply means that the society, you bring up your resources to, you know, collaborate with security agencies in promoting security. So the baseline for security is the community itself. And the community must own it, must resource it, and be able to promote it. When it overwhelms them, they invite the police.
A few years ago, sometime in 2012, we had the privilege to go and study just how it is done in other climes, this community policing system. We visited places like the New York in the United States to see what sort of systems they had in place. They also had a community policing outfit, but it was done by the police. The police was soliciting information from the people, like some sort of intelligence, and they had hotlines that people could call anonymously. They had ways of also rewarding intelligence that led to, you know, good action, it was seen on the part of the police, or that resulted in something tangible, or helped in cracking a case or solving a case. That was from the police. That was initiated from the police. That was some form of neighborhood watch. And that was some of the things that prompted the community to be very interested in keeping an eye out for their members. Even within criminal gangs, according to the police, they found out that some of them had the incentive to even tell on some other members of the criminal gang if they knew that, you know, the reward was going to be very good. Do you think that that sort of system could work in a climate such as ours?
No, because if you look at our rural areas, the real community level rural, how many policemen are there? You know, you're talking about New York, but let's talk about rural areas in Nigeria.
Isn't that where the question should start from? The areas where we haven't addressed the deficiencies with the police. So, for instance, you talked about the community themselves owning the system, and that when things fail, they should be able to call the police.
Precisely.
Many people have argued that that part of calling the police is where things seem to go a little awry, because then you now begin to face the deficiencies that the police have been facing. The fact that we do not have enough personnel, the fact that we might not have fuel in the vehicle, or they might not even have any vehicle. If they do, maybe they have a motorcycle or two, they might say there's no petrol in it, things of the sort. Have we really addressed the deficiencies that our policemen are currently facing?
We have not. We have not addressed the issue. And like you rightly said, you know, the community lack the firepower, the requirement, because it's been taken from them. They are not supposed to hold lethal weapons and all that. It's held by the police. And so when issues overwhelm them, all they need to do is call. So it's like, you know, it's symbiosis. You know, it's partnership that works there. They have to interface. But unfortunately, on the side of the police, like you rightly said, the mobilization period is quite difficult. It's quite challenging. You know, the logistics is quite challenging. And these are some of the areas that we really, really need to address to make sure that there is quick response, rapid response, in response to the core of the community's needs. And I agree with you, that's a gap that must really be filled.
So can we really be talking about community policing if we haven't filled this gap? Because the question of confidence will come in. If the community, I mean, we're already beginning to see communities. You've talked about how in many urban areas, people have organized themselves. They have put resources in place to ensure that they're able to police their communities. But it will always seem that the weak link is when they're moving from whatever security situation they're facing and calling in the police. That's where there seems to be a weak link. If that is the case, don't you see a crisis of confidence coming in here?
The crisis of confidence does not really arise from logistics and resources. The crisis of confidence is when this information is passed to them. How do they use it? that creates trust. The breach of trust arises from what they use with the information. Either it's in response time, or that lopsidedness in the response, or even the person providing the information becoming a target of attack, and so it creates distrust. And this question of trust must really be addressed. And in addressing it, they have a lot of programs which are not working. For example, you have the police-community relations that goes on all the time and all that. But the basic things are not being addressed. The basic things that need to be addressed are perhaps, collaboration with the communities and gain their confidence, gain their trust, so that there'll be mutual understanding and mutual cooperation. That aspect is not being there. When you find the police in your community, you're beginning to wonder, has he come for arrest? Is there going to be accidental discharge? Is there going to be any, fracas or something of that sort? That shouldn't be the case. The case should be that when you see a police around you, he's your friend, you move around, you see children going around him to say, oh, that kind of a thing. So we need to build that confidence between community and police. It's partnership. The police cannot be everywhere. It's not possible for the police to be everywhere. Therefore, you need the citizens themselves to do part of it. The part that requires them to do is this question of early warning mechanism, information. As soon as something is brewing in your neighborhood, you alert them, and they're able to respond quickly. That's what it's supposed to be.
Whose initiative is going to be, that, on whose side is the initiative going to come to build that confidence, which you say is lacking right now?
I think the police need to do more work as an institution to make sure they gain the confidence of the people. They are the ones who are, delivering service. And so, community members should be treated like clients. Clients that you deal with, that you respect, that you really, court him or her to make sure that, he likes you and he has confidence in you, just like a normal business transaction. If a customer has no confidence in your services, he shuns it, doesn't attend to it. So that's exactly what it is. So the police should rather be more of trying to win the hearts and minds of these community members so that they can gain confidence, they can gain trust, mutual trust, so that information can flow freely. Even where they have deficiencies, the community will be able to provide for those deficiencies. We have seen how communities have provided vehicles. They have tasked themselves to provide touchlights, provide certain, even build structures for them to stay. These are kind of goodwill that the communities from time to time promote, where the police themselves should be able to reciprocate by way of good gesture, kind of, so many activities, social activities, okay? Community police football team, community, one-day police academy. You go to a market and bring women and all together and say, let us teach you how to, let us play basketball, those kind of things. So you begin to warm your heart into the heart so that, they gain confidence and they begin to call you.
Would you say then that we're focusing on the wrong things? If right now the attention, because from the argument you are putting forward, it would seem that we already have community policing. If I'm getting it right, do we already have it?
We in a way, it's brewing, it's developing, but it has not matured to the extent that is required. The mere fact that there's still insecurity and the mere fact that, for example, we conducted a research work in the Northeast, and there was this slogan, they say, if you see something, say something. See something, say something. Virtually many of them will see something and say nothing.
Why?
Because they believe that there's no trust, that they believe the information they give will not be utilized. They believe that there will be reprisal attack on them. All kinds of reasons why they will not see something and say something. So
which points to the fact that, even though the police is also trying to, get the help of the communities, and the communities to a large extent, because even in the Northeast, we should talk about, we know that there is civilian JTF there as well. So it would seem that in many instances, the communities have been able to organize themselves, to a large extent, but it would seem that there is a missing gap between securing the trust of the confidence and the confidence of the police, or maybe the other way around, maybe the police securing their trust and their confidence, and also having the resources in-house, it would seem, to be able to take the needed action? Because some people will also say that, have we really equipped the police well enough? In terms of training, in terms of capacity, you know, they must be able to know what to do in certain circumstances. They might lose the trust of the people, not because they do not mean well, but because maybe the training just wasn't enough to handle the situation right. You think that could happen?
Yes, that could happen. And the structure of the police is such that an aspect is promoted at the detriment of another aspect. The aspect that is being promoted is the aspect of law and order. You know, law and order, which is okay. But there's an aspect of it which also talks about defense of the space, territorial space. And that's why, if you look at the history of this country, there was a time that mobile police was established. Mobile police, the role and function is quite different from the law and enforcement order. It is supposed to, you know, defend territorial spaces, to defend areas and all that, you know, to fight against criminals and all that, okay? Somehow that was played down, and then you now had what they call a National Guard. If you remember, one time in the 90s, there was this structure they call National Guard that was also created, that worked for a while, just to make sure that you bridge the gap between this law and order enforcement and the real, you know, fight against criminality and kidnapping and all those kind of things. So whereas you can have training for law and order, you should also have training, very strong training and well-equipped, you know, segment of the police that can really do, you know, the fight, you know, the combat aspect of, you know, keeping law and order. So that aspect is missing. That aspect is not equipped, and it's also missing in terms. And so at the end of the day, if you do remember, the National Guard was, you know, proscribed, it was banned, and we came back to status quo. Right now, you can hardly see the mobile police really being effective. So that aspect is lacking, and a gap that must be addressed. And that is why you find the army taking the role of this aspect of it. You know, the army is not supposed to be in charge of law and order. Mm-hmm. They are supposed to, you know, be in the combat and enforcement, all those kind of criminalities. That gap is there, and the army, you know, fills the gap, whereas that should not be the case. So in order to roll them back to their own primary role, you need to really bridge that gap of, you know.
Just quickly, I want you to comment on this controversy on the tenure of the service chiefs. You saw the debate that raged in the House, and for them, at the end of the day, they said this is not really about the law. They just believe that the service chiefs have overstayed. What are your thoughts on the tenure of service chiefs?
Well, let me first of all say that the tenure of service chiefs is at the prerogative of the president, the commander-in-chief. However, those calling for their removal have a point, and the point they have is that there's tenure. You know, if you look at the terms and conditions of service of the armed forces, it states clearly that service chiefs can first have the first 2 years, renewable to a second year, which means a total of 4 years. If they have gone beyond that, of course, people calling for their removal are justified based on that particular criteria. And so I think they have a point there. And secondly, when you look at military operations...
But there are those who argue that, you know, the president has the powers to extend it for way longer if he decides that that's what he wants.
That's why I say it's at his prerogative. But going through the books, what does you have on paper and the structure that's put in place for terms and conditions of service, it simply says that service chief has first 2 years and another second 2 years, and that ends it.
Let me bring in our second guest at this point, Mr. Joshak Habila, who is a retired DIG Police Operations. You're welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I don't know, I'm sure you must have been studying the controversy that has, you know, come up since Amotekun was launched. I'm sure you've also seen the conversations that have happened on the floor of the National Assembly, and even the outcome of the meeting of the president with the service chiefs yesterday. They say this is going to be complicated, a little complicated. We will need to rally support to tackle this insecurity. What are your thoughts on the progress that we have made so far in terms of the conversations that we've been having?
Well, it has been very interesting. One, the calling on the service chiefs to take a bow, using the words on the floor of the National Assembly, that they should take a bow. If they will not resign, they should take a bow and quit. To me, I wouldn't say that the legislators have gone to a point where it shouldn't be so, but on another thought, you should know that the National Assembly members are very, very close to their people on the ground. That means that they speak the minds and the thinking and some of the expression of the people, of their people in their constituency. But in other words, I was thinking that the National Assembly has expressed in their views on the floor of the Assembly these few days should be able to be brought to the table of Mr. President, and such discussion could be like something as an advisory capacity to be able to let Mr. President know if there are things on the ground that are bad, and that if the prosecution of the operation for the insurgency in the Northeast is not on course. I think Mr. President would have listened also, and I think also that they are in position to convince him to say that there should be a change, rather than maybe just asking them to take a bow and ask them to resign on the floor of the National Assembly, and asking to some extent that Mr. President should resign. I think it was okay, but it was a little bit harsh, because I think that there could be other ways of trying to cross-fertilize ideas with the executive, convincing them that there's a need for a turnaround.
I wasn't really focusing on the call to, for the service chiefs to step aside. I was looking more in terms of the conversations that have been happening around community policing and all the other, conversation that people are, having on rejigging how our security architecture is currently structured. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, community policing, as we've said it several times here, is that it's a bottom-top strategy. It does not change the police functions, but it's a way of, it's a strategy, it's a platform that recognizes the contribution and the input of the community themselves.
Bottom-top approach initiated by who?
It is initiated by the police will have to surrender to the communities where they're policing. And so decisions that are taken in such community and such location must be a decision that has been agreed upon the police and the community. And so when you want to police this time around, you don't come to a place as a police officer or a security agent and then you decide to them what you want to do. You come in and find out what their problems are and how this problem can be tackled. And so the people are carried along. And the people now see themselves as part of this security architecture on ground. And so they will be able to give a lot of information that must have been turned into intelligence for us to know what are their problems and how could it be resolved. And that is the bottom up. But as it is now, the policing is from top down. You come to a community and you tell them what exactly you've come to do and how you intend to achieve it. And so they are not really part of the planning process, but they watch you because it is what you give out. And sometimes what the officer in charge of that locality know and what the problems are might not be the problems of the people.
Okay, when we come back, I'll ask you whether some of the outfits that we have seen being initiated by governors and even at a regional level fit into the definition of what you say community policing is? When we come back from this break, please stay with us. Well, Lieutenant Colonel Ademola Lawal, retired Army officer, and Joshua Habila, retired DIG Police Operations, are still with us in the studios. And we're talking about restructuring the current security architecture. Before we went on break, you gave us, what community policing is all about. And I said when we come back, I'll ask you whether what we have on ground now, the regional security outfit recently launched by the Southwest governors, and whether some other contraptions we have seen launched by governors within their states. So, for instance, in Enugu State, they have the forest rangers and, some other efforts being put together. In many states, we have vigilante groups. Will those outfits amount to community policing?
Not really. But they are an integral part, but those are not the police community, community policing structure. Yeah, I agree with you that whether it is in Maiduguri as insurgency or herders farmers in the North Central or armed robbery and some other kinds of crime, maybe in the Southwest, I would rather say that community policing structure must be driven by the will of the government in consonant with the various communities. Some of the things that are on ground, particularly the Omotekun, which is leopard, and if you look at the emblem, the leopard is pressing angrily towards its own prey, to tear it apart. And that explanation by the governors is that that means zero tolerance for crime. In doing that, I think that cannot be taken in isolation with the police. The Commissioner of Police and the Assistant Inspector General of Police and any other person that is involved in internal security, whether the military right out there in that locality or in those states, should have been carried along. They should be able to let them know that this is what they want to do, because the Constitution or the police... From
the conversations that we saw that the IG was represented there at least on 2 occasions. They were not carried along enough?
Well, we didn't see we didn't see a lot of sensitization as to exactly what that meant, and that's why people jump into fear and apprehension that because there has been a lot of issues of security, particularly herders, farmers in that region, and on the express, most of the road linking these states to Lagos and other parts of the country have also had its own share of armed robbery and kidnapping. And so because they also want to make sure that the purpose of government, the main primary responsibility of government constitutionally is the protection of life and welfare of the people. And they said they want, that is why they're doing what they're doing, because they can't sit.
You see, that's not community policing. What makes it not to be community policing?
Community policing must have a structure that is in place, that other security agencies, particularly the Nigerian police and others, must be carried along. From the planning to its execution. If you look at the Hizbah in Kano, which is predominantly an Islamic state, the police were carried along. The Commissioner of Police were carried along, and the supervision of the activities is done by the police. And the police is aware of what they're doing, and that's why you haven't seen anything that is contrary. There were no suspicion. People were properly educated. and the people were trained and restricted.
Well, that's not to say that there was no fight from the center.
There was.
There was a big battle at the center.
There was.
Yeah.
It went to court.
Yeah.
And because they had some, the State House of Assembly legislated. Mm-hmm. And there was a lot of, there was quite a very reasonable time, you know, that is set aside for sensitizing the people and letting them know what the rules are. What are their roles? And how do they intend to carry this? You know, sometimes some of the things that they do and some of the operation is supervised by the police.
So what is different with, say, like a civilian JTF and Amotekun, for instance?
The civilian JTF in Maiduguri,
yes,
were trained by the military, and they are properly sorted out in terms of screening and knowing who they are and capturing their biodata and then telling them what exactly they should do and putting them where they know they will be relevant. A lot of them also are also placed where they bring in intelligence because the locals, you know, security and policing is a local thing. And so these people have been able to be very, very positive, and that's why till today they are relevant to the operation of the Northeast. But if you do this without sensitizing the people and without any legislation specifying what the roles of these people are, then there's a lot of suspicion because you can see that...
suspicion on the part of who? The
headers. Some of those of them that have had issues or have been called upon sometimes in this region with a complaint of nuisance of rearing their cows, as expressed here that you saw. And so they just thought that they were trying to set up a trap for them, that if there's anything, these people that are operating on their own could harm them.
Do you want to quickly respond to that, Lieutenant Colonel Lawal?
Yes, I think, first of all, let me agree with him that security is bottom up, like I said, and it begins with the community, which I alluded to much earlier. But for Amotekun, I think that they have done it in two layers. Basically, the community in the bottom up must be there. What I see for now, you know, vehicles and all that, and I believe that down to the community level, perhaps there are Amotekun, you know, personnel also taking care of the community level aspect of it. And so for me, to that extent, it is community level graduating a little bit to you know, a higher scale of it. Perhaps where you have, you know, infrastructures, where you have roads and all those kind of pieces that are, so to speak, that are not, you know, picketed, that are not, you know, that do not have presence of communities per se, is where the upper layer of it begin to patrol and coordinate and all that. But at the grassroots level, the community level itself, yes, it is a welcome development because it's part of community-based policing at that level. When you talk about sensitization and all that, yes, perhaps there is communication gap, and that is what really needs to be breached. And once it is breached, I don't think there's anything wrong and illegal about it. It's part of community-based policing that has been scaled up somehow in order to cover the entire region in a network system, because also security needs network. If you escape from this community, you enter another one, there must be network. And so Amotekun is also a way of networking within that, you know, environment from that community level, scaling it up to that regional level.
Well, gentlemen, I know that the conversation is going to be ongoing until we eventually get a consensus on what exactly we want, what sort of security architecture we think will eventually work to give us the security, because at the end of the day, what we desire is security. We have to thank you for coming on Sunrise Daily this morning. Lieutenant Colonel Ademola Lawal is a retired Army officer. He's also the head of research at the Savannah Center for Diplomacy, Democracy and Development. We also have with us Mr. Joshua Habila, who is a retired DIG police operations. Sunrise Daily continues about now with the crew in Lagos. Please stay with us.